He poured scalding coffee on a child and thought no one would dare speak up. Isaiah Walker, just 11 years old, sat quietly in his seat when Victor Langston, wealthy, powerful, and entitled, decided to make him feel small. A black boy alone in the sky, surrounded by silence, invisible to those who should have protected him. But when they picked Isaiah, they didn't know who they were messing with. His mother, Ruth Walker, wasn't just a mother. She was a seasoned civil rights attorney. And the woman who witnessed it all? Zara Washington, the flight attendant who had already filed a discrimination complaint the day before. What came next wasn't just justice, it was exposure. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you're watching from and make sure to subscribe, because the story you're about to hear isn't just about one man. It's about all of us. The cabin lights dimmed. Outside, the clouds turned orange against the early morning sun. Inside, row 9 held more than just 2 passengers. It held a reckoning, waiting to break free. What began with a coffee cup would soon shake an entire system. The hum of the airplane was steady, almost soothing, as 11-year-old Isaiah Walker clutched his well-worn backpack and stepped into the narrow aisle. It was his first time flying alone. Across the terminal earlier, his mother, Mrs. Ruth Walker, a civil rights paralegal with tired eyes and a fierce heart, had kissed his forehead and whispered the family motto, "Head up, shoulders back, speak only if it brings peace." Isaiah tried to remember that now, even as a strange chill ran through him. He was heading to Washington, D.C., not for vacation, but for the National Chess Open, a milestone that came with both pride and pressure. Months of late-night matches, careful strategies, and sacrifice had led to this moment. But the first move of this journey was not his to make. At the gate, they were told their seats had been separated. Due to last-minute changes, the agent had said, eyes avoiding theirs. Ruth protested calmly, showing the confirmation email. The agent, expression hard as laminate, didn't budge. Now, seated in row 9, next to 2 suited strangers, Isaiah swallowed his nerves. Ruth had been sent all the way to the back. "It's okay, Mom," he'd whispered, but was it? He was a small boy with a giant dream, suddenly alone in a crowded metal capsule flying 30,000 feet above everything familiar. A tall white man in an expensive blazer arrived and paused at the row, glancing at Isaiah with a barely hidden grimace. "You're in my seat," the man said, voice sharp enough to slice through the hum. Isaiah checked his boarding pass. "It says 9B, he answered softly. "So does mine," the man replied, his tone a challenge. "What would you do if someone questioned your right to be exactly where you were meant to be?" The flight attendant, young and uncertain, glanced nervously at the man, then at the boy. "Let me double-check," he muttered. Isaiah shifted, sensing the unease spreading around him like fog. Sometimes injustice doesn't announce itself with shouting. Sometimes it shows up as quiet exclusions, as seat changes, as looks that say, "You don't belong." And on this flight, that silence was about to break. The man took the seat next to Isaiah with the air of someone doing charity. His cologne was sharp, his leather briefcase sharper. Without a word, he dropped it between them, partially on Isaiah's feet. The boy shifted, trying to make space. The man didn't notice, or didn't care. Moments later, the man reached into his coat and pulled out a stack of printed documents, spreading them across the tray table so widely that Isaiah had to hold his elbows in, like a bird folding in its wings. "Pardon me, sir," Isaiah murmured, barely audible over the hum of the engine. The man didn't look up. "Stay still," he said flatly. "I have work to do." They turned his eyes to the window, feeling the weight of every second. It wasn't just the cramped seat. It was something else. The unspoken message, "You don't belong here." And the worst part? Everyone around them saw it, yet no one said a word. Have you ever been in a room full of people and felt completely alone? The young attendant returned. "Sir," he said hesitantly, "Isaiah's ticket is indeed for 9B. You've been reassigned to 9C." The man exhaled dramatically. Figures, he muttered, loud enough for passengers nearby to hear. Some new seating policy, I suppose. Give away everything to make it look diverse. Zaya flinched, unsure if the sting came from the words or the silence that followed. Then, in a flash of adult calculation, the man turned slightly and added, Nothing personal, son. Just the way of the world now. It was a fake kindness, a velvet glove over a steel fist. Isaiah nodded quietly and picked up his chess book, hands steady despite the tremor in his chest. He remembered what his mother had told him. Politeness doesn't mean silence. It means knowing when your silence speaks louder. But in that moment, he said nothing. Sometimes, dignity looks like restraint. 2 hours into the flight, the cabin had settled into a low murmur of sleep and screen glow. Isaiah stayed alert, not daring to doze. He had just dropped his pencil, his fingers stiff from holding it so long, when he reached down to retrieve it from the floor. That's when it happened. A sudden jolt, a gasp, and then pain. Arya shot upright, a searing heat splashing across his cheek and neck. His blue shirt darkened instantly. The smell of scorched coffee filled the air. The man beside him held his cup at a tilted angle, dripping the last of the contents onto the tray table. Watch it, kid, he barked, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. You jumped into my arm. The lie came too easily. Isaiah blinked fast, his face burning in more ways than one. He could barely breathe, stunned not just by the sting, but by the audacity. Had he really just done it on purpose? Here, the man added with false chivalry, offering a single cocktail napkin. Accidents happen. Isaiah took it, his hands trembling. Thank you, sir, he said, because that's what polite boys were taught to say, even when kindness was nowhere in sight. And yet, no one said anything. Heads turned away. Screens suddenly became fascinating. Even silence can scream. If you had seen it, would you have spoken up? There, Washington, the flight attendant, saw the damp shirt, the boy's wide eyes, the trembling lip he tried to control. She didn't rush in, not yet. Instead, she observed, watched the man's calm, watched the boy's stillness. Because sometimes truth hides in body language. She moved quickly then, bringing cold napkins and a bottle of water. Let's get you cleaned up, she said softly, but Isaiah, still shaking, whispered, It was just an accident. Zara paused. He wasn't protecting himself, he was protecting peace. But justice and peace aren't always the same thing. Zara Washington had served 12 years in the sky. She had handled crying babies, medical emergencies, and turbulence that left grown men praying. But this was different. She'd seen the whole thing in the corner of her eye. The calculated tilt of the coffee cup, the flick of the wrist, the way the man never even flinched when Isaiah cried out. It wasn't clumsy, it was cruel. Zara approached the row with deliberate calm, her footsteps measured. Isaiah sat stiffly, coffee-soaked shirt clinging to his skin, a red welt forming along his neck. The man beside him stared out the window, a picture of forced nonchalance. Sir, she said evenly, I'll need you to accompany me to the galley. He scoffed. Why? The kid bumped me, it's nothing. But Zara didn't blink. Passenger injury requires documentation, FAA regulation. A long pause, a smirk, and then he stood, not because he respected her authority, but because he underestimated her resolve. Have you ever seen someone so sure they'd never be held accountable? In the galley, behind a half-closed curtain, Zara dropped the mask of niceties. I saw what you did, she said, voice low but unwavering. And I've documented it. His face shifted from denial to disdain. You think your word means more than mine? I know people at this airline. Golf with 3 of them. She didn't flinch. And I know what burns look like. I have pictures. I have witnesses. He leaned in, menace under his breath. You're risking your career over this? Over him? Zara didn't move. Some things are worth risking. And in that moment she knew, no matter what came next, she couldn't unsee what she'd seen. and she wouldn't stay silent about it. Sometimes strength doesn't roar, it whispers, "Not today." The seatbelt sign was still glowing amber when Ruth Walker rose from her aisle seat in row 32. Her hands clenched the armrests for a heartbeat. Then she moved forward, calm but purposeful. "Ma'am," a flight attendant intercepted her, arms spread like a gate. "Please remain seated. We're experiencing turbulence." "My son was burned," Ruth said. Her voice was low, but it crackled with something ancient, maternal fire. "I need to see him. Now." The young man hesitated. "He's in good hands." "Then those hands won't mind me joining them." "Have you ever had to push past fear because love gave you no other choice?" From the galley, Zara stepped forward, her voice smooth but ironclad. "I'll escort her." As they walked up the narrow aisle, the plane seemed to fall into a hush. Passengers peeked from their screens, the kind of curious half-glances that tried to feign innocence. Isaiah looked up as his mother arrived, his brave face cracked. "Mom." Ruth's breath caught. His shirt was soaked, his cheek pink and raw. Her fingers trembled, but her voice did not. "Who did this?" Isaiah hesitated. "The man. He said it was an accident." Ruth turned to Zara. "Was it?" Zara met her eyes. "No." Something shifted. Ruth dropped to one knee beside her son and held his hand, careful not to press against the burn. "You didn't deserve this," she whispered. "And you won't carry it alone." Then she stood tall, shoulders squared, eyes scanning the cabin. "I need the name of the passenger who is seated here. And I need to speak with the air marshal, the captain, and any federal personnel waiting on the ground." The silence in the cabin deepened. Even whispers stopped. Sometimes justice walks in quietly, on steady heels and with fire behind her eyes. It began with a whisper. A silver-haired woman in 7A leaned toward the aisle and spoke, just loud enough to carry. "I saw him tilt the cup. The boy never touched him." Across the row, a teenage girl with purple braids held up her phone. "I didn't catch the spill, but I got what happened right after. You can see his shirt and the way that man lied." A hush rippled through the cabin. Not silence, but the tight stillness of people suddenly aware that they could no longer pretend they hadn't seen. A businessman in a navy tie looked up from his tablet. "He did it on purpose," he admitted, voice low. "I should have said something earlier." Zara and Ruth exchanged glances. Confirmation, finally, from the silent crowd. And then a woman 2 rows back muttered, "But what if it really was an accident?" The tone wasn't cruel, just hesitant, the way people often speak when they don't want to believe what's right in front of them. Isn't that the hardest part sometimes? Not deciding what's true, but admitting we saw it and did nothing. Zara stepped into the aisle. "This isn't about blame," she said, steady as steel. "It's about accountability. A child was hurt. That matters more than status, more than comfort." Ruth nodded. "We're not asking for outrage. We're asking for truth." From her seat, the teenager raised her phone. "I already uploaded the clip. People are watching. This won't disappear." That sentence, simple, defiant, moved through the cabin like a breeze that carried change. The passengers shifted. What had been quiet complicity began to look like reluctant courage. Sometimes, it only takes one person to speak for others to find their voices. And one voice, rising at 30,000 feet, had just broken through the clouds. By the time the plane touched down at Reagan National, the cabin was thick with more than recycled air. It was tension. Word had spread fast. Not just about Isaiah, but about the man in first class now trying to slip away unseen. Zara had been pulled from regular duties. 2 executives from Atlantic Airways stood waiting at the jet bridge, one holding a clipboard, the other a practiced smile. "Mrs. Washington, please step aside for debriefing," the taller one said, already turning away. Ruth narrowed her eyes. "Where is the air marshal?" "There was none assigned to this flight," came the smooth reply. "Convenient." Then came the real blow, an order from corporate. No statements to media, no involvement of law enforcement, no release of video. The incident they claimed was a customer service misunderstanding. Isaiah sat 2 rows back, burns on his cheek, shirt stained, heart racing. Have you ever watched the truth get dressed up as fiction, right in front of your eyes? Zara refused to surrender her phone, citing FAA protocol. Passenger injury, she reminded them. Federal jurisdiction. But the threat hung thick in the air. They mentioned her HR complaint, filed just last week about promotion bias, as if to say, this is why you should have kept quiet. And Ruth? She was already 2 steps ahead. From a borrowed phone, she sent a detailed summary, injury photos, the teenager's video, eyewitness names, to her firm. They'll try to bury this, she told Zara, but not if we speak louder than they can dig. 1 voice alone could be silenced, but not 2. Not when one had the law, and the other had nothing left to lose. Sometimes, standing your ground means standing in the storm with no umbrella. Just conviction. They tried, of course. The E-line moved fast, faster than truth. Zara was placed on administrative review, her badge suspended. Ruth was warned, off the record, that pushing further might affect her standing in ongoing legal cases. And Isaiah, he received a voucher for a future flight, as a gesture of goodwill. But something unexpected happened. The teenager's video, just 16 seconds long, spread faster than anyone predicted. It wasn't just the footage. It was the look on Isaiah's face, the silence of the cabin, the confidence of the man who poured the coffee. People didn't just watch, they felt it. Soon, passengers from other flights began speaking out. A retired judge came forward with a signed statement. A well-known banker admitted he'd seen it and stayed silent, then wrote a public apology. One by one, they stepped out of the shadows. Have you ever seen people find their courage only after someone else risks everything? Zara's union, once hesitant, filed a grievance. Ruth's firm secured a temporary injunction, preventing the destruction of any airline communications related to the incident. And then came the interviews. Not from flashy networks, from local reporters, community papers, podcasts with loyal listeners. The story reached people who'd flown those same skies and felt unseen. Every time someone shared it, the wall cracked. A school in Georgia sent Isaiah a new chess set engraved with his name. A retired teacher wrote a letter. You played the hardest game of your life at 30,000 feet, and you never tipped the board. Not every victory makes headlines. Some happen in quiet inboxes, in courtroom motions, in the hearts of people who finally say, enough. Sometimes, the beginning of justice sounds less like a gavel and more like a whisper that refuses to go silent. 3 months later, Isaiah Walker stood behind a podium in Washington, D.C., far from the cramped seat in row 9. He wore a crisp navy jacket, his burn scars fading but not forgotten. His voice, steady, clear, rose in the hearing chamber. When the coffee hit my face, it hurt, he began. But what hurt more was seeing everyone pretend it didn't happen. The room held its breath. He wasn't a boy playing chess anymore. He was a young witness to a system unraveling. Behind him sat Zara, reinstated but with a different title now, Director of Passenger Equity at the FAA. Ruth, too, had helped pass a new federal bill mandating independent oversight of airline discrimination complaints. They hadn't just fought a man or an airline. They fought silence, and silence lost. Have you ever seen the arc of justice bend because someone smaller refused to move? Isaiah continued, I didn't lose just a tournament. I lost the chance to feel safe in the air. But because of people who stood up, now others might not have to. His words didn't need polish. They had weight. The bill passed with bipartisan support. Airlines were required to retain cabin footage, report assault claims within 48 hours, and establish whistleblower protections. Later that evening, outside the Capitol, Isaiah asked Zara, "Do you think it was worth it?" She looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Some games you play to win. Some you play so no one else has to." A pause. Then she smiled. "And Isaiah, you didn't just play. You changed the board." Sometimes victory doesn't look like applause. It looks like a child walking forward without fear, and knowing the world behind him changed because he stood still when it counted. Sometimes the loudest voice is the one that never raises itself. In the quiet courage of a child, the firm resolve of a mother, and the steady hands of a woman doing her duty, we are reminded that dignity doesn't shout, it stands. Isaiah's story isn't just about injustice at 30,000 feet. It's about how easily the world looks away and how powerful it becomes when someone decides not to. We may no longer walk in courtrooms or climb corporate ladders, but we still have choices. How we respond, how we witness, how we remember. Perhaps the greatest lesson here is that doing what's right rarely feels convenient. It feels costly, lonely. But every time someone like Zara or Ruth chooses integrity over ease, the world shifts, just a little. Have you ever watched someone be wronged and wondered if your voice would have made a difference? Maybe next time, you'll find that it can. Because in the end, justice often begins with one person refusing to let another stand alone. And sometimes that's all it takes. In a quiet room filled with morning light, Isaiah sat by the window with his new chessboard, the pieces arranged with care. His burns had faded, but some marks don't show on skin. They live in the silence we carry and in the strength it takes to keep going. There was no parade, no applause. Just a boy, a mother, and a woman in uniform who chose not to look away. And yet, from that silence, change began, a policy rewritten, a truth recorded. A system, once untouchable, now learning it could be held accountable. The echoes of what happened on that flight reached beyond the clouds. They reached into courtrooms, classrooms, and living rooms, where ordinary people remembered what courage looks like. If this story stayed with you, share it. Subscribe to Echoes of Racism so these voices don't fade into silence. In the meantime, I've chosen 2 stories I think will move you just as much. Take care, and we'll see you soon.